conversation. Okay? And remember, this goes for you too. So taking care of your own emotions is really important when you're dealing with challenging behaviors. Questions, comments? Okay.
Wait,
yeah.
So this is the case for, you're saying from like 9 to 25.
So it gets better. So, but the neocortex doesn't fully form until 25 or 26, 24, somewhere in that range. Just means the brain is continuing to grow. And now we actually have research that the brain's making connections throughout life. So you can probably just push that out all the way to the end of life. What I want you to emphasize is that this part of the brain is taking over for these kids. In particular, adolescents, as they get towards the end of adolescence, their ability to control this is getting much better. Okay, so you don't have to worry about it being this way till 25 or 26. But there are some people who it is constantly the case, right? And so.
But also, there's things like drug use or alcohol use at a younger age that impair that control.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's more and more common, of course. There was an article just this morning in the paper, I don't know if anybody saw it, about alcohol, or rather tobacco use in teens, and 1 out of 3 are using tobacco products, and most of them are vaping, although it was interesting that a lot of them are smoking cigars. So that was a surprise to me. It's like, really, cigars? It's kind of gross, but okay. But vaping is very big. But risk-taking, again, is a big part of adolescence, and so that's a part of the drug use. I find that a lot of it is self-medicating. So a lot of kids are using alcohol, using drugs to self-medicate, and actually I'll touch on that a little bit when we get into the show. But yeah, you don't have to worry till 25 or 26. And again, everybody's different. Everybody's on a different developmental timeline. But in general, you're going to start to see this more in your adolescence. Okay? Again, it's not their fault, right? You're getting a more emotional reaction. And a lot of kids hold it together at school, and they go home and then they release with you where they're safe, right? And take that as a badge of honor that you developed that safety with your child. Don't take it personally, because it's very, very common. Parents will come in and tell us all the time, oh, we have this horrible meltdowns at home, and the kids at school are perfect. And they're working so hard to stay perfect at school that when they get home, they need to have that release. Okay, the quest for independence, of course, separating from you is another hallmark of adolescence. So another thing that makes it challenging, right? You need to continue to have this relationship, be there as their coach, but they want independence from you. And they will do it in all kinds of inappropriate ways. Okay? So it's just a hallmark of the age. And the thing is that their peer group becomes paramount. So what you say is not as important to them as what their peers say, or the impression that they're getting from their peers as far as feedback about what they do, what they wear, etc., etc. Here's my advice. Don't try to fight it. A lot of times parents will try to steer their kids, especially adolescents, towards certain friends. Doesn't work. It always backfires. Right? You can't do it. You can influence some of those things by the things that you do. You go to a church or house of worship of some kind. They usually have a youth group, right? There's scouts, there's other organizations that you can steer your kids towards. But if you try to make individual decisions about friends and keep your child from being friends with a particular child, it's not going to work. It's the Romeo and Juliet effect, is what I call it. That forbidden love or forbidden friendship becomes that much more appealing and attractive to your adolescent. Because it's a way of getting independence. Right? You can't control who my friends are. And so that's one of those things as parents, you have to be able to let go. You have to. Again, you can influence it in subtle ways, but don't criticize your child's friends. Okay? It's a sure way to create distance between you and your adolescents. Okay, So what do you do with all of these developmental changes that are happening? Okay, we talked about maintaining dialogue. It's going to be really important for you to be an active listener, okay? Especially when you're upset. Listen first. Listen first. I get kids in the office for behaviors all the time, right? It's part of what I do as a principal. And I've learned that I'm going to talk as little as possible in the beginning. And you know what happens? I get all kinds of valuable information that I wasn't seeking. Okay? So by just saying, sometimes I'll just say, do you know why you're here? And kids will tell me about stuff that had nothing to do with why their teacher sent them there. And so it's a really nice way to just sit back and listen first. Okay? I already talked about the importance of having those sexual conversations. Again, your kids need to know what's coming next for them developmentally and with puberty. So have that conversation, as uncomfortable as it is. And give them more opportunities for independence, not less, even when you're upset with them. Again, difficult to do. Much easier for me to tell you to do it than it is to actually do it. Right? One of the ways that you can do that is by having family conversations about things that are not about them, about things that you're doing as a family. Earthquake preparedness, for example. If you haven't had that conversation as a family, you need to. We're way overdue, as I'm sure you know, for a significant earthquake, so involve your adolescent in your family plan for what you're going to do in different situations for an earthquake. What are you going to do if you're all home? What are you going to do if some of you are home and some of you aren't? What are you going to do if everybody's not home? What's your plan for that? That's a great way to get your adolescent integrated into your family, making important, possibly life-altering decisions, right? And doing it together and trying out what it means to be an adult. These are really important decisions. Let's make them together. Your teen, your adolescent may have some great ideas about what to do if they're at school and you're at work or at home and there's a significant earthquake. So have those conversations. That's just one example of a way that you can do it, right? There's lots of things that you can do. Whatever you can. Share your opinions. This is important. Your beliefs, your opinions, your values, share them all the time with your kids, but don't judge theirs, because they will come back with some opinions that you're going to think are crazy, and they might be. Don't judge it. Just listen, right? Let it play out, because that's what they're doing. They're experimenting. Okay, so that's what you should do, what you shouldn't do. This one's hard, but don't attempt to control consequences. Control behavior through consequences. Okay? I'll guess that every one of you was punished as a child. Okay? There is mountains of evidence that punishment doesn't work. Sorry, it doesn't work. What do I mean by that? Okay? Can you control behavior with punishment? Absolutely. You can also control behavior with rewards. But both have been shown to backfire in the long run when it comes to creating an independent person who can make critical decisions on their own. Okay? Everybody get all that? Because there's a lot in there. Okay? Punishment, rewards do not work in the long run. Again, you can control behavior in the short run. It's easy to do. But like I say to parents all the time, it's like that's how you would treat your dog. You would train your dog the same way with behavior modification techniques, right? Give them enough reward, give them enough punishment, and they'll stop doing or start doing whatever you want them to do. But they're doing it to either get the reward or avoid the consequences. They're not doing it because they thought about it or changed anything else. They're just trying to get a reward or avoid a consequence, which is what any of us would do, right? If you want a child who's going to think and make decisions, then you have to get away from using consequences. And this is really hard for parents to do. But when your child is 15, 16, 17, whatever age it is, and they're making decisions about whether to get in a car with somebody who's been drinking, about whether to have sex with somebody, I can go on and on about all the critical decisions they're going to make when you're not there, right? You won't be there when your child makes those decisions. The only way they're going to get better and make a good decisions that's really from them and not based on what their peers is if you start giving them the power to do that now. And the only way you can do that is by decreasing your use of consequences and rewards. You see the connection? Okay, it's really critical and it's really hard to do. Does that mean there are no boundaries? Absolutely not. Okay, this is where positive discipline comes in. Jane Nelson says this all the time if you hear her speak, because people have taken the name positive discipline and they created a misnomer that it must mean permissive parenting. You just let your kids do whatever they want. Absolutely not. She says we are kind and firm at the same time. Okay, there are still boundaries. We still have limitations on what they can do. You need to put limitations around their exposure to technology, for example. Okay, that's a limit that you have. You make family agreements about limits. That is not permissiveness. You're not just letting your kid do whatever they want, but you do need to give them more authority, more autonomy to be making decisions. Questions, Mama?
So, my 13-year-old started using Instagram, and so we have an agreement. Like, you can use your mobile phone, whatever technology you use for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, good.
But I see him using it a little longer than that. Sometimes when I'm not around. So I tell him, hey, based on the agreement, I'm going to take away your. So that's a consequence, right?
Sure.
So is that okay?
Yeah. So I'm saying decrease the use of those consequences to control behavior. That doesn't mean you don't have limits, and that when limits are broken, sometimes there's driving the car when they're getting old enough to drive, right? You're going to follow traffic laws, right? And if you don't, then that privilege is going to be reduced. That's a natural consequence in my mind for what they've done, right? You have an agreement on how much time they can use technology. Okay? The natural consequence of breaking that agreement, of breaking that trust, is that we are now going to restrict your use of that technology further than from the agreement. So they learn that if they want more exposure to technology, they want more freedom to make these decisions, that they need to hold the agreements. Now, here's one of the keys. It's going to be much more effective and easy to hold the line on these agreements if they're part of making them. Okay? So they need to be involved in the decisions about what these agreements are going to be, and don't be afraid to negotiate with your kids at this point, right? They're going to want as much time using technology as you'll give them. So they're going to ask for 8 hours a day or whatever it is, okay? That doesn't mean you can't negotiate. And don't be afraid to give a little bit from what you would like, because that, again, is going to build that capacity in them to be making these decisions on their own. Okay? Great question. Yeah.
Will you be making these slides available?
I'm happy to. And there's also, I gave this talk once before and they videotaped it, and it's available. Of course, it was different because those parents had different questions, but it's available on the district's YouTube channel. And if you want, I brought lots of my cards, or you can just email me at Guadalupe or ask for a card at the end of the show, and I'm happy to share the slides with you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask just because this consequence thing is big at our house.
Yeah.
So you're saying just those punitive reactive consequences of
Right.
they're driving me nuts and I'm going to take this away from you because I'm going to lose my mind and
Yeah.
do something.
Okay.
That's the sort of thing we should be trying not to do.
Yeah,
But
so-
doing it in a more mindful, collaborative
Yeah.
way, like where we have a plan together and he
Okay.
knows what the consequence.
So here's another key. So you started saying that, and I'm not criticizing you, okay? You started saying that by saying, you're driving me nuts. Okay? If that's the case, and you're going to feel that way as a parent, right? I feel that way as a principal sometimes. Kids are driving me nuts. That's the time to recognize that it's about you at that point. That you need to take care of yourself. And that's not the time to have that conversation or impose those limits or whatever it is. You need to walk away and give yourself some time. Go lock yourself in the bathroom if you need to, right? But you need to recognize that it's about you now. Make sense?
Yeah.
And then when you're okay and you're calmed down because you're gotten over being driven nuts, then go back and have that conversation with them. But it may not be the right time, right? You got to choose those times carefully. I have kids at our school who I have to wait till the next day to have a conversation with them about things that happen. The next day, right? It's not like, some kids it's 15 minutes, 20 minutes. That's like most kids, right? Depending on what happened. and they're able to talk. Some kids would rather write to me, if I let them write or draw a picture. But sometimes it's the next day. And then they come in and then they're able to have a rational conversation, and that might be better for you too. You're going to get better results, okay, when you're both de-escalated. Yeah.
So my 9-year-old's a bookworm.
Yeah.
She uses reading
I
to
know.
settle herself.
Yes.
So what we try and do for her to give her a bit of independence is we'll say goodnight to her and we'll say, right, you've got 10 minutes to read. And then turn your lights out and go to bed. And then maybe, I'll go do something and I'll come back.
Yeah.
And it's been 15 minutes and the light's still on and she'll
Yeah.
still read.
Yeah.
And I will walk in and she'll be like, oh, I didn't know the time. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I am going to take your reading privilege away unless you start to be more responsible for yourself to recognize, okay, that's the 10 minutes. I never take it away because I know that she can't get to sleep without doing the reading.
Okay.
Am I doing it wrong?
Okay, so as you know, I'm never afraid to share my opinion. I would let the whole thing go. I would let her
But she
read.
would just keep reading for like half an hour.
Let her.
She would
Let
be
her.
able to sleep.
Let
And she's
her,
awful in the morning.
let her read till she falls asleep, and then go in and turn the light out. And then, if she's struggling in the morning, have that conversation with her eventually, not when she's struggling in the morning, but have that conversation with her about the connection between when she's going to sleep and when she's getting up in the morning. Reading is an incredibly powerful thing, right? And a lot of people and a lot of kids get lost in the reading, and I'm sure that the sense of time is different for her when she's reading. So let her have that joy in her life, because I think that's really important, first of all. If there's a natural consequence of the next morning's little struggle, okay, let her deal with that as much as you can, even though I know it makes your morning more stressful too. And then if you need to, like I said, have that conversation with her, let her. But I would let the whole thing go. I would just let her decide what she wants to do. Okay? Hard to do. So the other thing you can do is try it. You can experiment with timers and have her set the timer. When the timer goes off, it's time to turn off. So you're taking yourself out of the equation. As much as possible, you want to take yourself out of these equations. Okay? So let the natural consequences be the teacher. So with the younger parenting class, I share this anthropological look at parenting. Has anybody seen me do this? No? Okay, so I'll tell you real quickly. So there have been lots of anthropological studies on parenting, which I find fascinating. So Conrad Lorenz, Ashley Montague are two very well-known anthropologists. And they have studied what we might call primitive cultures and how they parent. So for example, the Foray in New Guinea are a fairly isolated tribe. They were for many, many hundreds of years. They're now not so much. But anyway, they have a culture that relies very heavily on using weapons for hunting and using fire for cooking and warmth. They allow infants and young children to handle the weapons and crawl or walk towards the fire. They do not intervene. Okay? Their children can successfully deal with fire and successfully handle weapons from a very young age. What they found as a culture is that when you allow the child, for example, to crawl towards the fire, that they won't crawl close enough to get burned. They'll crawl close enough to become uncomfortable and then move away. And then their anger, if you will, is directed at the fire, not at a parent who intervenes. Makes sense? The difference? This is very common in Native American cultures here in the United States as well. Okay? So another example is you go to the beach. I had this experience when I went to the beach. This always happens to me, by the way. I think it's a vocational hazard, where somebody sits down next to me. I want to hand them a positive discipline book. But this guy comes to the beach with his kids. He's just a gentleman. He has two young children, I would say 5, 6, 7 years old. And of course, they put their stuff down at the beach. And what do the kids do as soon as they put their stuff down? They run towards the waves. Okay? There weren't big waves that day. There's waves. And he screams out at the top of his lungs, "I told you to stay out of the water." Right? And I'm thinking to myself, you just set yourself up for failure. Right? With your family. When you do that, it's like going to the pool and telling your kids not to splash. Right? You're going to do that. The natural consequence of a kid running into the ocean is they're going to probably get knocked down by a wave. That's a very valuable teacher about the power of water, right? The chance that you're going to have to go out and grab that kid and pull him in is pretty slim. The other thing that happens, at least here in Santa Cruz, is your toe touches the water, and the first thing you experience is shock, because that water is cold. So most kids, you'll see, run, and then turn and run back, right? And then they'll run a little further, and then they'll run back. Watch them, be there in case you need to go in, but the chances are that they're going to end up responding in an appropriate way without you having to intervene. And as much as possible, you want that to continue to be the case through all of these kinds of experiences in life. Let the natural consequences be the teacher for your child, and you'll maintain a much more positive relationship with your child. And it doesn't mean you can't have those conversations about those natural consequences, right? And there are times when, as a family, you have to impose certain things, right? You have to leave on time to get to certain appointments. So you can't let your kid do things. And those are things kids understand if you explain them. We have to be to this doctor's office on time because we have 20 minutes, and that's all we're going to get with that doctor. We can't be late, right? Kids can understand that, right? And then you might have to do things if they're still unwilling to go to force them to go. That is a part of parenting. I'm not saying that there aren't times when you have to do that. As much as possible, you want to try to avoid teaching through the use of consequences. And it's especially true for adolescents. You will be this fueling the fire of rebellion when you give your adolescent consequences. Grounding is a popular consequence for adolescents. It doesn't work. Okay? I'm just going to tell you right now, it doesn't work. Okay? Your adolescence is going to become more angry that you've grounded them. Okay? Does that mean there aren't sometimes natural consequences? Absolutely not. Okay? You can still have those consequences, but when you're imposing something like grounding, okay, you're saying you need to be separated from me at a time when your adolescent may need to be connected with you. Right? Okay, enough preaching about that. Another very difficult one, number 2, okay, don't raise your expectations for grades and school performance. If anything, decrease your expectations. Okay? I'll tell you right now, middle school grades mean nothing about how your child's going to do in life. No college is going to look at an 8th grade report card. It's not going to happen. Okay? Let them experience, again, the natural consequences of, for example, not doing homework. Okay? You know, the research on homework is not great. There's not a lot of research to support homework. Sorry, but there's not.
True for middle school as well?
Yeah. It's you look at, there's a book called The Battle Over Homework by Harris Cooper that summarizes all the research that's been done. There's been a lot on homework. And I think the limit, I don't trust my memory, but I think it's like an hour and a half of homework a night can still be beneficial. And as soon as you exceed that amount, you get this big drop in the success of that homework. And in fact, it can become harmful because it starts to build in kids a negative attitude towards school. Yeah.
So my daughter's, I've never had to ask her to do homework. She's kind of hard on herself.
Great.
And she also logs into Power School and checks every day.
Checks her scores and everything.
And
Yeah.
she's a high achiever, but I'm worried, like, how do you not have that become anxiety or...
Yeah, so 2 things I would recommend is 1, like decreasing your so she knows from you there's not any expectations,
we already
which
do that.
is great.
Yeah.
You've already done that. Having the conversation about it with her.
Just
Because
do your best and don't worry
Yeah.
about me. Right?
Anxiety has surpassed depression as the #1 mental illness of young people today. Okay? A lot of it is cultural. So she's getting that pressure. Great that she's not getting it from you because most kids will say it comes from their parents. But they're getting it from teachers, they're getting it from peers, right? And so they built their own expectations in there. And sometimes, oftentimes, especially with adolescents, it's unrealistic. They will set an unrealistic bar for themselves and then be super disappointed and have it damage their self-esteem when they don't achieve that. And so I think you need to have a really honest conversation with her about your concern about that, right? And it's okay to do other things. And then again, the subtle influence of encouraging other things in her life besides schoolwork. So as much as you can subtly encourage her to do whatever it is that she likes.
Oh yeah, and she already does. I mean, she
Great.
does the volleyball, basketball. She does
Great.
soccer. She does the play. She
Yeah.
has all those interests.
Great.
But at the same time, like we like that she does well at school. We don't want to say don't do well at school, right?
Right.
But how do you foster? Like I don't know. Maybe it'll just not be a problem.
So, well, it is a problem. It is a problem. It needs to be addressed. It won't just go away on its own. The drive for achievement is different from the joy of learning. And if you can try to subtly influence her more towards the joy of learning side, that's what's going to carry her through those difficulties, which eventually are going to come if they haven't already, right? She's going to hit walls in high school and college where she's really challenged by the learning. And the best way to get over those is when you have that joy of learning and you are learning for the sake of learning, not because you want to achieve something. So I could get into this whole conversation, probably with time, not well. We can get into this whole conversation about growth mindset versus fixed mindset.
Yeah.
I encourage you to look at the work of Carol Dweck. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Great. I mean, some of the research she's done is amazing, and she's done it with preschoolers all the way up to medical school students at Stanford, and found the same thing about that growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So the more that you can steer her towards that growth mindset, so that she's able to get through that, and then it's not about the grades and about the scores and checking all the time to see where she's at. It's about what she's learning and the joy of learning. So Thomas Armstrong, really big on that too, if you ever get a chance to look at his book.
Would it help to show the kids like articles about anxiety
Yeah.
and talk to them about
Yeah, I think the more you talk about it, the more you share those things. Talk about how anxiety has become so prevalent in our culture, and ask them, why do you think that is? They'll tell you, because they're exposed to it all the time, right? Why do you think we have so many kids dealing with anxiety? Right? I tend to think a lot of it's because we have so many parents dealing with anxiety, right? And so the kids that I know that I work with that have anxiety, in particular severe anxiety, it's parents. You know, we bring the parents in, they have the same anxieties. And so addressing those things in yourself is critical. But yeah, having those conversations, sharing articles, looking at videos, TED Talks, I think are really good because they're fairly short. They can be very informational. It's good conversation starters. Yeah.
My daughter, I mean, we've kind of maybe said too much. The grades don't matter in junior high.
Yeah.
I mean, because we have a daughter in college and we've seen,
Yeah.
we've seen how that happens and
Yeah.
how our daughter in college is doing this phenomenally now. She didn't do well in junior high and
Yeah.
high school was okay. But my daughter's friends at Union, yeah, the anxiety, like a couple of her friends are like, well, I got an A on my test. I got 100%. What did you get?
Yeah.
And it's like that every day.
Yeah.
And she gets A's and B's, but there's just so much anxiety and
It's never
stress over the
Yeah.
grades.
Yeah.
And, like my daughter will say, well, grades don't really matter here. But the parents just keep pushing the kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's really hard to combat.
Yeah.
And having a conversation with the teacher about it can be helpful.
But you
Right.
know what? A lot of it, it's the moms.
Yeah.
They're just hovercraft moms
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
don't get it.
Yeah.
And they don't know they don't understand the damage they're doing to
Yeah.
their kids.
Yeah.
We tell our daughter, like, you don't talk about grades. It's like, you don't talk about your doctor's visits or whatever, right?
Right.
It's like, it's your stuff.
Yeah.
And if someone asks you and you want to share, you can, but it's no one's business but yours.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't ask anybody
Yeah.
else.
I think that's good
And
advice.
you
Boys don't talk about grades, I bet.
Yeah.
It's just, it's
Actually, I was
like,
going to tell you, boys are pretty relaxed.
boys just play sports.
I mean, too relaxed, I would say, because
Yeah.
they don't talk about
I have
grades.
Yeah.
friends of boys who say that they do.
Oh, do they? Oh.
And they have also this stuff that we think only girls have that my friends said they see it in their boys too, like this
Okay.
drama.
Yeah.
Drama.
Yeah, drama.
Well, the same thing is true for eating disorders.
Yeah.
Right? We used to only see it in girls, or almost exclusively in girls, and now we're seeing it in boys as well.
Mhm.
So, yeah. All right, let's move on. Don't tease your kids. So when they're adolescents, sometimes they will tease you or you're teasing, and it can be easy to fall into this teasing thing. It doesn't go well with adolescents. Okay, they have a difficult time distinguishing what's teasing and what's really what you're feeling, and so don't fall into that trap of teasing. And then we already talked about not choosing your tease friends. Okay, really good resource for this is Challenge Success, started here at Stanford by Denise Pope. And I love that it's from Stanford because that's become the holy grail that everybody wants to get their kid into Stanford. And they're coming out and they're addressing this whole thing with grades and success and basically saying this is not healthy for kids, right? They're saying the same thing. Denise Pope has some TED Talks. We're not going to watch this video, but you can go and watch this specific homework. She has other TED Talks. But they do a survey of kids, adolescents, and they did an extensive survey, thousands of kids, all here in the Bay Area. And what they found is that 9 to 13-year-olds were more stressed by school than anything else in their lives. More stressed by this than family dynamics, than conflicts, than bullying, any of the other things that you can think of that our children face. They're more stressed by school. 90% of them admit cheating. 90%. Okay? And then this one always amazes me. 73% of high school students list academic stress as their #1 reason for using drugs. They asked the same question of parents, and only 7% said that they thought their children would use drugs as a way to alleviate the stress from academics. The difference, 73% of students and 7% of parents. Huge difference, right? So for some reason, a lot of parents are not seeing their child as someone who would use drugs, and yet we know they're rampant, and they're here, right? They're here in our district, right? This is something that we need to face as parents, as teachers, as administrators, that we're dealing with stress that is caused by what you guys were just sharing with your kids and their homework loads, their comparison with peers over grades, etc. So it sounds like you're all aware of this. I recommend their website as well. And the good news, so now we need some good news. Is there something that can address all this? I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. This is a group called Wait Until 8. So this is another, I can't remember, did I put it on the handout? I don't remember. If not, please write it on there. I highly recommend this group. So their whole thing is not to get your kid a cell phone with a data plan until they're in 8th grade. And they cite lots of CEOs from Silicon Valley companies who won't give their kids a cell phone. Okay? Because they know, maybe better than anybody, what some of the harmful effects of exposure to technology, and in particular through cell phones, can be for kids. So this organization, they want you to take this oath that you're not going to give your kids a cell phone, or at least a cell phone with a data plan, until they're 8th grade. And they cite all of these different research studies that have been done to link cell phone use with all of these problems, right? So I'm not going to elaborate on any of them, but just know that this is something that you can control as a parent. Your team's going to hate you for it because all of their kids, all of their friends, right, have a cell phone and they have iPhones and whatever, all right? But it's something you can control. I really feel strongly that kids are not ready to have these powerful things in their hands that can take them to anything in the world that they want to go and check out. It's just too soon. They don't have the cognitive abilities. Remember the stuff earlier about the amygdala and what's happening with their brains. They're not at a place in their development to be given a tool that's this powerful and this potentially dangerous, and the research supports it over and over again, okay? So I'm going to talk about the one thing that you can do that alleviates anxiety, stress. It's been shown to decrease lots of maladies that adolescents face. It even has been shown to delay the onset of sexual activity. It's this, okay? One thing that you can do is having dinner together as a family, okay? So if you're not already doing it, I highly recommend it. And notice there's no technology on the table, okay? Dinner, even if it's 15 or 20 minutes, the time when you're just together. If your kids don't talk during that time, so be it. Okay? Sit together as a family. Okay? This is an extremely powerful thing. The research continues to show that this is one of the most effective things that you can do for your child. Amazing. Right? Just having dinner. Yeah.
So my husband gets home late to
Yeah.
wait for the kids to eat. Would it still count if it was me with the
Yeah.
kids?
Yes. Yes. And then as much as possible involve your husband on the
On the
weekends.
weekends, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if it's just you, we have lots of single parent families, right? Just as
I don't know
valuable.
if it made a difference if you're actually like a family of 4 with mum and dad. Does it still count if it's just mum and dad's missing?
I don't know the research on that, but I haven't seen anything, but I would think it'd be just as effective. So, okay, we're going to try a behavior scenario. So if you want to, you can either wrestle with this by yourself, or if you want to talk to some people that are sitting by you, you're welcome to do that. But I want you to imagine that you're going out of your way to drive your son, could be your daughter, to a friend's house. They don't have their driver's license yet, so they're dependent on you. Whenever you go out hiking to the beach, whatever your family practice, put on sunscreen, right? But this time you get to the house, it's just you and him in the car, or you and her in the car, and you ask about the sunscreen and you get this reaction. Okay? What do you do? Okay, I want you to think about it and talk about it first. So just spend like a minute or two having a conversation about how to respond. If you want to do it individually, do it individually.
Yeah. That's good, right? And I'll just say,
Calm or go here for
Right.
yeah. Might as well not do that. So I have like, I don't have to, I'm fighting that.
Okay, so finish up your conversation, finish what you're saying, and then
Like later on,
Okay, so what do? What'd you come up with in your groups or in your own thinking about this?
Let it go.
Let it burn. Right? Let it go.
I think that's a great approach, let it go, but also to say, it's like, well, why? Why are you saying no now?
Okay.
And then say, well, maybe check the UV, it's your decision, but, you know, like my kid's really fair.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you don't, you may get a sunburn and you'll be uncomfortable all week, and
Yeah.
you might not be able to do your best at soccer, but it's up to you.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Ideas? Yeah.
My son just turned 14 like a week ago, and I feel like this is my life the last 6 months.
Yes.
So my first thought is, as I'm sitting in this room, I have all sorts of lovely ideas about what I might do.
Yeah.
But in the in the moment, I'm just like dumbstruck when
Yeah.
these things happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes I let it go, but a lot of the time it'll be like, what the heck, have you lost your mind?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then sometimes later on I'll come back and say the thing that, you know, I can think of right now in this room and say,
Right.
you know, what were you thinking? What's going on? Is there something else? But
Yeah.
but I'm still very much in my real life at the, who are you and what have you done with my son?
Yeah, yeah, which is very common. So thanks for being so honest about it, right? And they have lost their minds, right? Remember that in a very literal way that they've lost that higher order thinking ability. They haven't completely lost it. It's not completely gone, but it's taken a back seat, right? So that's important to remember. Remember, the whole title of this talk is being proactive, so planning for yourself for these kinds of things, because it's often something like this that's pretty insignificant, or like it totally catches you up by surprise, right? You did not see it coming. That's why you need to be proactive, because these things are going to continue to happen. So here's one of the keys. It's never been a problem, okay? So one of your jobs as parent is to be the detective. What's changed? Now, know, first of all, that they may not know what's changed. So this is a challenge with parenting any child of any age, is that they are not always able to articulate through their words what's changed. But it's still your job as the parent to try to figure out what's changed. And it's not worth forcing them. You can't force them, right? You're not going to take the sunscreen and put it on their face. I strongly recommend you don't do that. But you can have the conversation, okay? But I can tell you, you're at the house where he's going, you're not going to have a conversation that's going to be effective in any way while you're sitting outside a friend's house. Sorry, not going to happen. Because what's he thinking about, or what's she thinking about? They just want to get inside and be with their friends, or get in the backyard and be with their friends. They're not going to, it's not the time. If you force them to have that conversation, then it's not going to go well. So let them burn, okay? If they need to, right? We don't want that to happen a lot, and then have the conversation with them. Again, say as little as possible. One of the things on your handout is WAIT. It's an acronym. It comes from the training that we do here as a district in response to severe behaviors. It stands for Why Am I Talking? It's a good acronym to remember. WAIT, is it on there? It's at the bottom. Yeah. And so try to keep that in mind. Do as little talking as possible, but be the detective and figure out what's changed, right? What's happened that's caused this severe reaction. So I share this all the time when I talk to parents. So some of you may have seen it before, but it's just a reminder, again, we talked about it before, that your kid's going to exhibit some of these behaviors that you find really challenging, and they may be really difficult as a family to deal with, and some of those same behaviors can in the long run be the things that help them be an extremely successful adult. And we just need to keep reminding ourselves of that, because you're going through some difficult changes, but you don't want to respond in a way that's going to inhibit your child from developing some of the very characteristics that, as you say, are driving you crazy, right? Because they will become beneficial things to them in the long run. And as I've said before, our natural response to these big behaviors or escalated behaviors often to take power away from teens when what they most need is more power. Okay? Our natural reaction, right? There's all kinds of research about this specific to certain behaviors, that our natural reaction as parents is often the exact opposite of what the kids really need. We need to think about the behavior and what's the motive behind the behavior. In behavioral terms, we talk about functions of behavior. There's 4 functions. I'm not going to get into all this now. It's technical. But we need to consider as parents, being that detective, what's the function? What are they trying to accomplish? Whether they're able to articulate it or not through their behavior. And then we can respond in a way that's much more effective. Right? Again, the acronym, we're not going to watch this video because we don't have time, but I highly recommend it. Okay, if you go on TED, I think it's a TED Talk, yes, TED Talks. Stuart Ablon is a psychologist, psychiatrist who works with families and adolescents and children. And his whole thing is that kids do not choose to act in maladaptive ways. Right? They don't choose to do this. It's not a question of having to try to motivate kids to act more responsibly or better. It's a question of skill. Kids who frequently or chronically have behavioral issues are doing so because they lack a certain skill. Does that make sense? So we often respond, and when I say we, I'm saying parents and schools and society, we respond to maladaptive behaviors as if the person needs motivation to do better. And what we're finding from years and years of research, it has nothing to do with motivation. That kids who are chronically misbehaving, I don't like that term, but chronically exhibiting maladaptive behaviors are doing so because they lack a skill. Right? One of the frequent skills that's lacking is frustration tolerance. Okay? It has to be taught from an early age. Okay? So I'm going to skip over this learning theory. Here's frustration tolerance. It's pretty easy to teach, actually. Okay? It starts with exposure therapy. So this is just like the allergy kids, right? We have kids with severe allergy now, and they're almost all of them are going through exposure therapy, right? Where they give them a little tiny dose of what they're allergic to in a controlled setting and gradually build their tolerance to that. You need to do the same thing with frustration by allowing your child to experience it. Don't save your child from frustration or loss or hard times with friends, all those things. You can't rescue them, okay? Don't do it. Okay, secondly, teach and play a game. I love chess. Okay, teaching kids to play chess, don't allow them to win, right? Have them experience loss. If you have younger children, okay, Chutes and Ladders is a great game because you can be doing really well, right? And you've got all the way, and then you hit this chute, and you go down the slide, and you lose all this. It's a great game for building frustration tolerance. There's tons out there, right? Just playing games and going through this experience helps build frustration tolerance, and then encourage emotions, right? Probably self-explanatory, but it's important, and it's especially important in adolescence when their emotions are already escalated, to encourage and not discourage a display of those emotions. That can be especially challenging in public, right? But it's important that we don't react in an adverse way every time somebody else gets emotional. Know that that's an expression of how they're really feeling, and it's okay. And somebody might think you're a horrible parent because your kid's crying in the grocery store, or crying in a restaurant. It's okay, right? Let them think whatever they're going to think, right? And just allow your children to experience. Questions, comments? Yeah.
So about the board game,
Yeah.
I have like 9-year and 6-year.
Yes.
The moment they say that, they are losing,
Yeah.
they're going to go away.
Then they
You're
don't
not
want to
playing
play.
fine. You're
Yeah.
not playing fine.
Yeah.
So
That's-
why every time I have to lose when you're playing?
Yeah. Yeah. So
This
tell
is the
them.
way they just give up. So
Yeah.
should we just keep trying?
Keep trying. Keep playing. Find another game that they want to play. But it's partly that you want to play too for your enjoyment too, so they can understand it. And they can understand fairness, but that's not fair to you if they stop playing every time they start losing the game. A real common thing, especially for younger children, is to just change the rules of the game, right? They start losing, we're going to change the rules to benefit them. And again, that's a great opportunity to have that conversation about what's fair, because you're an important part of that game, and you don't want to play if it's not fair to you, right? And they're going to experience the same thing in school, right? And they don't want to play the way their friends are playing, then they're going to be missing out on a lot of stuff, right? And they're going to get socially isolated. So it's important for them to learn that at home.
You talked about encourage emotions and let them experience that frustration or that pain and especially not wanting to solve their problems with their friends. What is any advice on friend problems?
So can you be more specific?
It's just the circles they're in and who's the best friends and feelings hurt if they're not invited somewhere and somebody else is, and not being asked to play dates when somebody else is, and it's not fair, and and I always invite them and that kind of stuff.
Just be the sympathetic listener. That's all you can do. Again, you can't control friends, and I highly recommend you don't try. Okay? Be there as a support person for them and listen empathetically, but don't offer advice. It's harder for us to do. Let them go through and experience this, and hopefully on their own find a different group of friends or adjust their relationship with their friends. FOMO is a big thing now, right? Everybody know what that is? Fear of missing out. It goes back to our cell phone talk, okay? But now kids are constantly worried that even when they're with their friends, interestingly, that they're missing out on something that's happening with other friends, so they're always checking their phone to see what other people are doing, and there's this constant anxiety about what might be happening somewhere else that might be more interesting.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're going to have time to get to it, but Madeline Levine is a therapist up in the North Bay, and she's done a lot of work with adolescents and families that are not doing very well, and they're from very affluent families. But at the cover of her book is a group of teenagers, and they're sitting together. There's 4 of them, and every one of them is like this with their phone.
You see all the time.
While they're sitting there with each other, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, you do see it all the time. And it's not because, right, they're having conversations about what they're Googling,
Yeah.
right? They're all checking to see what's happening on social media. Yeah.
I know there's not a lot of time, but I want to say that number 2 with the game playing is, I'm a huge advocate for that because it has worked successfully in my home. I just have the single one child, but he's very physical.
Yeah.
And so every day since the rainy days, it's even gotten more game playing indoors.
Yeah.
And I never let him win. Like he knows I will never let him win. So he's always like rising and pushing himself to the challenge.
Yeah.
And the good thing is that I've found that lately, all I have to do is say, hey, Ethan, you want to lose tonight? You know, like that's a tease that actually works.
Yeah.
Did you want to lose tonight? And he'll up if he's on
let's
anything at all, whether it be a phone or something. He'll like pop up, and then he pushes the game into like 10:30, you know, and it's like, oh, okay, well, we have to stop at some point. But I'm a huge advocate for number 2 because it's been very successful, and you foster a really close relationship as well with the kid.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's really cool. All right, oh, there it is. Next slide. Price of Privilege by Madeline Levine. So another book that I highly recommend. But she deals with kids who primarily are having severe psychological issues. Self-harm, as you may know, is we go through phases with this. It often takes the form of cutting. It's mostly girls, but not entirely. And it does tend to happen in the beginning of adolescence. We went through phases a few years ago where this was on increase, then it subsides. I think we're in kind of a lull right now, but it's still happening. But interestingly, she finds the number one reason for this increase in anxiety and depression and self-harm among adolescents is a family emphasis on extrinsic rewards. I remember what we talked about earlier with extrinsic versus intrinsic. And then the distance between parent and child. And she's found an inverse relationship between the economic success of a family and the emotional connectivity of that family. The more affluent the family, the less emotionally connected they are. Fascinating. Okay? And the pressure to achieve is the other thing that's driving these kids towards some of these behaviors that she's seen in her practice. If you're dealing with these kinds of issues or concerns, I highly recommend her book. Okay, I'm going to skip over some stuff. We were going to do another behavior scenario, but we're down to just a couple minutes. I talked before about the importance of language, but I want to touch just briefly. This is directly out of positive discipline and some suggestions for how to handle specific situations or deal with behaviors. So I'm just going to highlight a few. One is connect before you correct. Okay? So if you go in and your first thing you're going to do is correct behavior, okay, it's not going to be successful unless you establish that emotional connection with your child first. That may feel really hard to do because you may feel like you're rewarding your child for inappropriate behavior, right? And you do have to be careful that you don't establish a pattern where you're providing, for example, a hug because a child's upset, because they're upset with themselves, because they've done something that they know they didn't want to do. It's been inappropriate. Does that make sense? So you have to find this balance of connecting with them without reinforcing the behavior. Or you're going to set up a pattern where they'll know if they do these things, they can always come to you for a hug. And that's how they get a hug.
Say that again.
Okay? So, you want to connect before you correct. So you're not going to be able to have that conversation with them about their behavior until you've established a connection. I still love you. I'm your mother and I love you. right? Or whatever it is you do to correct. But if you get into a pattern of behavior where every time your child is inappropriate, you're giving them a hug. That's what I just use that example because that's the one I see parents doing the most often, is there are some children who will then intentionally misbehave to get that hug, to get that connection. So you have to be careful that you don't create a pattern at the same time that you're connected. Okay, so this is obviously challenging. Okay, children do not develop responsibility in strict or controlling environments, but they also don't develop responsibility in permissive environments. Okay, so again, that goes back to our talk before about having those limits, but decreasing the use of consequences. Okay, involving children in decisions that you're making as a family and in agreements about how you want them to act. Okay, and real quickly, don't ask why after there's a big behavior. Okay, ask curiosity questions, and I put them on your handout. Okay, if you ask why you did something, it comes across, whether you mean it to or not, as an accusation. Right? Why, right, implies that you shouldn't have done whatever it is you did. Right? So just ask those curiosity questions, and again, listen. Okay, and I emphasize the fact that punishment may work in the short run, but fails in the long run. We're out of time. Sorry we didn't get through more, but I loved your questions, comments. Thank you very much for coming. I put my card back there on the table. If we run out, let me know. If you want the slides sent to you, just pick up a card and send me an email. I'm happy to send you the slides. Also, if you have questions or concerns and want to talk about your child, I'm happy to talk to you. As I said, I'm always willing to give my